No, I'm sorry, dear. You cannot be autistic. The disorganization and learning troubles you seem to claim you have, well, they are clearly something you have made up in your unfortunately pathological mind for the purposes of attention, dear. This, you see, is probably because you were born this way. Yes, unfortunately, you were born with less than normal amount of feelings, you see, dear. Yes, and I'm sorry you cannot seem to read emotions, dear. But this is the reason, you see, dear. Yes, it is simply because of a personality flaw, my dear. You are simply focused on yourself when you ask for a need to be considered, dear. No, it is not because of an actual need, unfortunately. You see, you cannot have needs, dear. People like you do not have needs, you see, dear. Needs do not exist for you, my dear. Only real people have needs, you see, dear. Certainly, you are not enough of a person to have them. Only real people experience physical ailments, you see, dear. I'm afraid you cannot have fibromyalgia or be in any kind of chronic physical pain, dear. No, I'm sorry, dear. You cannot have health conditions. This is impossible. I must warn doctors so that they do not waste their time and therefore money on one who is not enough of a person, you see, dear. Well, I must report back to your wonderful and learned physician, a man who, because he is a doctor like me, of course, has marvelously brilliant understanding of drugs A, B, and C, not to mention an elaborate and almighty knowledge of the latest wonderful drug samples, excitingly offered in order to alleviate your symptoms. I shall speak again with your charming family physician, who oh so kindly suggested that I blacklist or, pardon me, dear, assess you. Whence you come for apparent psychological help, for apparent health issues, in which you clearly pathologically perceive that you have, and are apparently upset over what you deem not being listened to. Yes, dear, he offered his unfortunately troublesome experience with you, whence he endured a 3-year hounding attempt from a clearly troublesome patient, one whom asks for adequate health care and ethical treatment. Unfortunately, based on his description of how you refused to take the sample medications asked, and instead demanded costly further investigation, pathologically stating that you inquired to know what was going on in order to function, as you claim, dear, and therefore opposed the good doctor's marvelous textbook treatment, as well as attempting treason by trying to inform of this perceived mistreatment of what you deem as misunderstanding a woman of supposed Asperger's syndrome. In lieu of this concerning behavior, I must conclude that you seem to be suffering with demanding ethical medical care, oppositional defiance disorder, dear, because only people have health problems, you see, and a person you're not, dear. You see, this is why you are unable to know how to act with people, dear. You pathologically seem to feel entitled to equal treatment, dear. You must understand that this behavior is highly disturbing, dear. It horrendously dishonors greatness and the golden rule of hierarchy, dear. This is incredibly offensive behavior, you see, dear. No, dear, I'm afraid it cannot be due to autism, and it most especially cannot be due to your perceived actuality of occurring abuses, as you call them, dear. This is impossible, you see. Why? Because I say so, and I, my dear, am a psychiatrist. Unfortunately, dear, you have a problem and it makes you inherently self-absorbed. Yes, it makes you inherently ask for things with false perception of human rights, because you are diseased in the head, dear. No, not because you have needs, dear. Again, only people have needs, dear. I'm afraid you are merely suffering from falsely perceiving that you may have human rights disorder, dear. Unfortunately, there is no help for such an issue as yours, dear. No, it couldn't possibly be because you have been hurt. Of course not, dear. Such a person as yourself cannot have feelings, dear. Therefore, you cannot be hurt, dear. Oh, you have tears now, do you? You feel violated, do you? Well, I'm sorry, dear. But I'm afraid I must indicate that you are also suffering from believing that being mistreated, misjudged, and structurally abused is somehow not okay disorder, dear. And unfortunately, dear, when you cry and pathologically perceive injustice over my truth, of my ultimate accurate diagnosis and summary of exactly who you are as a person, this is then called tears in which are not real, but rather because you want attention disorder, dear, in which you unfortunately also suffer from, dear. This is because you tend to suffer from wanting people to care disorder, dear, a highly narcissistic quality, you see. No, dear, this couldn't be a neurological disability. Of course I know this, dear. I am a psychiatrist. I do not know how to read an MRI of the brain, dear. But this is irrelevant, of course, dear. When you are a psychiatrist like me, dear, this is most certainly exempt. I'm sorry, I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about, dear. Now, let's get back to my definitive answer, dear. You see, no, you are not autistic, dear. You are too cunningly intelligent. A dangerous combination with your personality flaws, my dear. You are not the Rain Man. Only the Rain Man has autism, dear. Also, you are a woman. Women cannot be autistic, dear. This is impossible, you see, dear. You cannot have language like this, dear, and have autism. This is not what autism is, and this is the bottom line, you see, because I am a psychiatrist, and therefore I am right, you see, dear. No, I have not heard of Dr. Tony Atwood, dear, but that's no matter, dear, because again, you see, I am a psychiatrist. What? You say I cannot understand? Well, dear, I'm afraid I do not speak the language of compassion. Psychiatrists do not need to speak this language, you see, dear. So, let us finish, shall we? I am afraid I am now going to have to make my definitive diagnosis, dear. Unfortunately, you, my dear, have very bad personality disorder. No, unfortunately, dear, you're going to have to accept that this is the way you are. And for this reason, it may be difficult for others to love you. No, sorry, dear, there is no cure. Enjoy your life as less than a person, dear. So, I hope this consultation was helpful to you, dear. Now excuse me, dear, I must go write up your report, indicating to your care providers that your cries must never be heard, your troubles do not exist, and your tears are of the never real phenomenon.